Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. Race 9, the Austrian Grand Prix. After our short trip to North America, we're back in Europe where we have 4 races in 5 weeks before leading into the summer break. The Austrian Grand Prix is the second sprint race of the year, so it's an extremely busy race weekend. So lots to talk about, so let's dive on in. If you'd like a reminder of what happened last year where Charles Leclerc won Ferrari's last race, click on the link above or the link in the description below. Max Verstappen completely dominated this race weekend. Not only did he get a hat-trick or full house, which is the pole position, fastest lap and the race win, but he must have got, I guess, a royal flush, because he also won the sprint race, he was the fastest in the sprint shootout, and he was the fastest in pre-practice. According to my maths, and I might be wrong with this, but if Max wins every race and gets fastest lap, he will win the World Championship by Austin, which incidentally is the same race he did it last year. Different venue, same round. But we may be seeing a hint of a trace outline of a chink in the armour of the Dutchman, because this was the first race since Miami that he did not lead every single lap. It started in the sprint race where Checo Perez managed to get in front of him at the start. The two Red Bulls went at each other quite aggressively for the first lap before Max assumed his dominance. But then, more significantly, Charles Leclerc managed to lead several laps of the race after Ferrari nailed the pit stop strategy after Hulkenberg's safety car. And Ferrari, despite their upgrades, aren't yet on the same level as Max Verstappen's Red Bull. But this run of laps led is quite remarkable. Max is now third in the all-time list of consecutive laps led, on 248. He's behind Ayrton Senna on 264, and way out in front is Alberto Ascari on 304. Despite how dominant Max was at Red Bull's home race, there was still an awful lot going on with the other teams. McLaren bought a new upgrade package, only for Lando Norris's car at this race, but it looked really good. Norris was able to get 4th in the feature race and qualified exceptionally well in the sprint. You can kind of see how effective the new package is because Oscar wasn't running it, and he's usually so much closer to Lando. So that's a good sign for the team that they've really made a step forward. It's going to be really interesting to see what they can do in Silverstone. Oh, the guy in this photograph looking at the car is Lando's father. One of the unique things about the Red Bull Ring is that it's built on the side of a mountain surrounded by forests, and I really wanted to capture nature next to Formula One cars. Here is a photograph of Lewis going up the hill towards turn 3. He's overtaking one of the Alpines, which is a bit of a blur next to him, and I shot this at a 13th of a second, and this smooths out the background quite a lot. You still get the lush green colour, but now you get these really cool directional lines, which create a lovely sense of speed in the photograph. A bit further around, I got this shot through the barriers of Max Verstappen as he climbs a hill towards turn 3. It's always quite cool taking photographs through the barriers because it adds an extra layer in front of the subject, making the photograph a bit more mysterious. This was the first race we've had for some time that there was something interesting to eat in the paddock. There was an ice cream cart serving delicious treats, and on such a hot day, this was incredibly welcome. There was also a little bit of interesting news this weekend. Red Bull's sister team, AlphaTauri, will get a rebrand next year, so no longer called AlphaTauri. We don't yet know what the team name will be, but we do know that they're moving a lot of their operation to Milton Keynes to be closer aligned with the Red Bull team. This will hopefully allow them to develop a much more competitive car next year. The two drivers have a little bit of contrasting fortunes. At the start of the year, everyone was assuming that Nick de Vries would be the de facto team leader. He's F2 champion and he's Formula E champion. He's a little bit older than most of your average rookies. So he came into Formula One with quite a highly regarded reputation. And all expectations were that Yuki would struggle to match up to him in a similar way that he struggled against Pierre Gasly. There was the added pressure of rising Red Bull star and current F2 driver Ayuya Iwasa, who is doing an outstanding job in Formula 2, currently in 3rd place and the best positioned Red Bull driver. The assumption was that if Yuki couldn't turn things around, he'd be losing his place to Iwasa. However, Yuki has had a brilliant year. He's comprehensively outperformed Nick de Vries. He's grabbed the mantle as team leader, and although the points don't yet reflect all of his brilliant work, it's not going unnoticed. Many drivers in the driver's briefing said that Yuki was one of the top 3 performers of the year so far. So keep an eye on him in the next few races. It looks like he's finally turned the corner. I shot this from the top of the Paddock Club roof. So this is the kind of view you could have with Paddock Club tickets. For the second part of the session, I went down to the inside of turn 9 and 10. There are a number of interesting shots you can get around here. The first one I'd like to show you is Fernando Alonso, and I've taken this from inside a forest section. Using a slow shutter speed, I've tried to blur it as much as possible and keep the car sharp, so you can see the car flying through the trees. Next, we have Max Verstappen with the Austrian flag in the background. This is quite similar to a shot that I'm going to show you later, but taken from a different angle. Here you can see a little bit more of the side-on view of the car, which I think makes it quite interesting. There's also an opportunity to get quite a cool panning shot as the cars approach the orange grandstands on the final section of the lap. Here's Colin Sainz shot with a really low shutter speed, 1/10 of a second. The purple in the foreground comes from one of the Qatar Airways logos. The shot that I was really going for in this section was this shot of the cars as they approach pit entry. This is a shot of Max Verstappen with a very nice set of trees in the background, and you're shooting from slightly below the car, which makes it a really interesting image. The two Ferraris were second and third fastest, which is really good to see. It looks like some of their upgrades are really paying off. Charles was exceptionally close to taking pole position from Max, and this is a good sign for the season going forward. After qualifying, Charles and Max were having quite an animated conversation, and I got these quite fun shots of the two of them talking. Saturday and the start of the sprint shootout was exceptionally wet. However, by the time the cars got out on track, things had dried up a little bit. I went down to the pit exit to photograph cars leaving the pits with a massive grandstand in the background. It's a really cool shot because you can get quite low down here and there's an uninterrupted view between you and the cars. There was a bit of a bizarre incident with Lewis and Max. Apparently, Lewis had blocked Max at the end of his lap, and then Max kind of drove beside Lewis up until turn 3 to kind of put him off his lap. It was quite a bizarre moment, and I'm quite surprised the FIA didn't take any action. With both Mercedes and Aston Martin a bit off the boil in the sprint shootout, it did leave some opportunities for other drivers, such as Lando, Norris and Nico Hulkenberg, with Lando grabbing a very impressive third place. Rain was falling on the grid for the start of the sprint race. It meant that a lot of the teams erected awnings to keep the cars and drivers dry. Here's a photograph of Charles Leclerc sitting on his car, changing his race shoes for something that's a little bit more waterproof. The teams have these very cunning air cooling devices. They're completely non-mechanical and they're powered by dry ice. And occasionally you get a shot like this where there's smoke coming off the dry ice machine in front of Fernando Alonso's helmet. For the start of the sprint race, I made a little bit of an error. What I was trying to do was get a photograph of the back of the cars at the start. However, the race organisers had put a massive banner directly behind the cars, so that shot was no longer possible. I had to shoot slightly from the side, which just isn't as good. The other reason I'd come to photograph this part of the track was there's a great shot of the cars riding over the curve with the Austrian flag in the background. Here's a shot of Nico Hulkenberg. And you get this really cool mix of the inside flag on the curb and the flag in the background, and it just looks really, really good. This sprint race was exceptionally exciting. It started off in very damp conditions, so all the drivers were on intermediate tyres. But halfway through, things had cleared up, and some of the intermediate tyres started going off. So a few of the brave drivers came in and changed for slick tyres. One of those being Nico Hulkenberg. At the start of the race, he ran for a number of laps in second position, which is huge for Haas. That is probably going to be one of their best placings in a race the whole season. Along with the flag shot, you also get a very cool head-on shot as the cars come over a hill. And here's a shot of Max and Checo coming over the hill, and the orange smoke in the background is flares let off by the crowd. Race day was a lot drier and the Orange Army were out in force. I went to go and photograph in front of the bull statue. There's a huge stand there and practically everyone is wearing orange, except for one girl who was an Aston Martin fan. We had a new variation of the Miami drivers presentation. Formula One are still trying to find some way of announcing the drivers. This was a little bit better, although with the local announcers it was still a little bit odd. The drivers were supposed to be appearing to their favourite songs. I would be surprised if Carlos Sainz is listening to Smooth Operator, and if the number one song on Max Verstappen's playlist is Super Max. But anyway, at least they're trying. Hopefully one of these will work. If you were at the race, what did you think about this? Is it a good move? Once they were presented, they made their way into these quite cool cars to drive around the track and meet the fans. Nikon lent me this very cool fisheye lens, which I had a little bit of fun with on the grid. Here are some of my favourite images taken with it. You can get a fully circular image at 8mm. The only thing you have to be really careful about is making sure your feet aren't in the shot. The grid was a little bit light in celebrities. Gordon Ramsay and his daughter were there again. I think they might have a season pass this year. Mark Metterschitz, the Red Bull heir, was there with his girlfriend Victoria Swarovski. I went for a slightly more traditional start shot, head on but slightly to the side. Turn 1 is a fantastic place to photograph from because you get so many different angles. There's a really cool rear shot where you see the cars kind of cresting over the rise, and then you can shoot from the opposite side and see them coming head on towards you with the crowd in the background. I went up to the outside of turn 3 and managed to get a couple of shots of overtakes. Turn 3 is one of those places where a lot of overtakes seem to happen. It's quite a complex corner. As the cars approach it at speed, they have to travel uphill, and then there's a number of lines they can take into the corner. Depending on how well they execute the corner will give them traction and speed for the straight ahead. My final position of the race was in front of the grandstand with a big bull behind it. Here I was trying to capture slow shutter speed shots of Max Verstappen in front of the Orange Army. I've blurred it so much so that the crowd just becomes this orange swoosh in the background of the picture. As you can see, despite Max being completely dominant, there is so much going on in Formula 1. It's actually really exciting. In the past 4 races, we've had 7 different drivers on the podium, which is huge for Formula 1. But despite all the upgrades and all the changes to the other teams, no one is getting anywhere near Max Verstappen. Thank you so much for watching this review of the Austrian Grand Prix with me. I really hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope you've enjoyed being here in Vienna, the Austrian capital. It's a city I absolutely adore. If you happen to find yourself here, do visit the Nike store where you'll see a whole lot of my photographs from a previous project. Next weekend, we're in Silverstone, which should be an absolute cracker. Until then, goodbye.